Welcome to the Mental Health Series, Session 2, Change the Way You Think. We all interact with the world through our own eyes. Wouldn't it be great to have more control over how you experience life? We learned in Session 1 that even our negative feelings have value, that understanding them allows us to explore deeper, and in this session, we'll explore how our thinking drives the way that we feel. In today's session, I'll introduce the concepts behind cognitive behavioral therapy. Then we will explore a tool called the Daily Mood Log and learn to challenge negative thinking. This program is designed to be an interactive experience. I'll share some ideas and then I'll give you time to work through the worksheets. You can do this individually or as a group. My name is Chris Guzniczak. I'm a licensed professional counselor and partner at Flower Mound Counseling. I work with individuals, teens, and couples. I focus heavily on team CBT tools. They're developed by Dr. David Burns, and I'm going to share one of those with you today. It's called the Daily Mood Log. Let's talk about why it matters to learn how to change the way you think. Your perspective is the filter from which you see everything. It's the lens you use to live your life. This is about paying attention to thought patterns, specifically in times when you want to change the way that you're experiencing life. If you want to change your perspective, you need to be aware of it first. So let's start with the basics. First, yes, you talk to yourself. In fact, we all talk to ourselves. It's how we interpret our experiences. This is important because our emotional responses to our experiences are determined by those thoughts going on in our heads, not by the external events that are happening around us. For example, if you stand in front of an audience on a stage and you completely forget your lines, that situation is not creating your emotional response. Your internal talking, i.e. your thoughts, are what cause your emotional response. Those thoughts are a combination of the external stimuli, like forgetting your lines on a stage, but they're combined with your own perspective, your own experiences, your expectations, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, how you view the world, how you view yourself. All of this matters as you become more aware of what you bring into situations. You can shift your own thinking even though you can't change those situations themselves. We are going to use a tool called the Daily Mood Log, developed by Dr. David Burns. If you like this tool, I recommend exploring his website, feelinggood.com. Before we get to the tool, though, let's take a look at a scenario that we can use for our example. Imagine that you moved for a new job. You don't have close friends or family around. You work, come home, stay alone every day. You're struggling to connect with anyone at work, and you have doubts that you're even doing a good job at your new job. So if in this scenario you're feeling sad, down, lonely, maybe ashamed, why do you feel those things? Is it the situation causing you to feel those things? We're going to use the Daily Mood Log to help you separate the situation and the truth from your own distorted thinking, based on, once again, your beliefs, your expectations, experiences, and so forth. So we're really looking at trying to separate the situation from your perspective. So you can think of the Daily Mood Log as a tool to help you understand what is happening in your head in a moment that you do not feel good. It's like a magnifying glass into your thinking. We're going to walk through the Daily Mood Log in 7 steps. We will take on one thought together, and then I'll recommend that you try to work the tool for a few more thoughts. The 7 steps that we're going to use are, first, to begin with a single moment or situation. That's important because when we're dealing with changing the way we're thinking, we need to take one moment and be very specific about it. It's the only way to effectively do it. Secondly, we're going to circle the negative feelings, and we're going to give those feelings a weight from 0 to 100%. Each of these emotions can be 100%. So for example, if I'm feeling extremely sad, that may be up close to 100%. But if I'm also feeling a little bit Inferior, maybe that's more like 30%. Next, we're going to write down our negative thoughts. And similarly, we're going to capture a percentage on those, but on that it's going to be the percentage that we believe that thought in that moment. Next, we'll identify the cognitive distortions in those thoughts. We're going to reframe those negative thoughts. And then lastly, we're going to try to capture our belief in those thoughts after we work on this. And hopefully those percentages go down because we're challenging those negative thoughts. So the first step, once again, is to identify that single moment or event. And once again, it's important to be as specific as possible. So in this case, we're going to say that the situation is that I can't sleep because I keep thinking about the situation that I'm in. So in this scenario, let's just say we're lying in bed and we're unable to go to sleep, and this is that space that we're in that moment, okay? So then the second step is to circle all of those emotions that I'm feeling in that moment. And I'm going to give them a weight once again, depending on how strong those emotions are. So I'm circling things like feeling sad and down, I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling maybe some shame, and I'm also feeling extremely lonely in this scenario. So I've circled all those things, and I've given each of them a weight as well. Step 3 is to write down the negative thoughts that are creating those emotions that we captured above. Remember, our thoughts cause our emotions, not the situation. So there's a couple of tips when you're writing down these thoughts. First, you want to try to make the thought a statement, not a question. That just makes it more specific and more tangible to work with. Secondly, you want to be careful that you're not just describing a situation. You always want to take it a step further, and the example would be to, not just say that nobody talked to me today, because that's describing a situation. Maybe that's true. What you want to ask yourself is, what does this mean to me? And you might think, well, no one likes me. Okay, so that's a really good, strong negative thought that you would want to capture, something like no one likes me. So what you do is you capture a few of these thoughts, and then once again you ask yourself, how much do I believe this thought? And you can see what I did is I captured a couple of them at 100%. One of them was more like 50. Maybe I didn't quite believe it, but I felt like there was truth in there and it was still bothering me. So that's the next steps, steps 3 and 4. The next step is to identify cognitive distortions in your thoughts. These are ways that we twist the truth based on our own stuff that we're bringing into that situation. Remember, our brains want to protect us, but sometimes our brains are actually wrong. They make incorrect connections, incorrect assumptions based on things that maybe we've learned in the past. So here are a list of 10 negative distortions or ways that we do twist the truth. First is all or nothing thinking, viewing things in absolutes, in black and white. Another is overgeneralization, which is viewing a pattern of negative events when that pattern doesn't necessarily exist. Mental filter is when we dwell on negatives only. It's all we can see. Oftentimes when we're depressed, all we can see is negatives. Discounting positives is actually taking that a step further. We may acknowledge that there is a positive, but we insist that those positive qualities don't even count. Jumping to conclusions is very common with anxiety. When you think about jumping to conclusions, it's having beliefs, but they're not warranted by the facts. There's kind of two types. One is mind reading, which is assuming that people are reacting negatively towards you. Another is fortune telling, which is predicting that things will turn out badly, just knowing that something bad will happen. Magnification, of course, is blowing things out of proportion. You could also minimize things as well. Emotional reasoning is when you feel a certain way, so you just assume that that's true and that's the way things are. Should statements are important. It's something we all do probably much too often. It's really judging either yourself or others with things like should and need to and must and those types of words. Oftentimes it's after the fact when there's really no value in it anymore. Labeling is attaching labels to yourself in situations where, for example, maybe you make a mistake. The problem with a label is you're taking a mistake or an action and you're connecting it to yourself or to others. And then the last is blaming, and that can be either self blame or other blame. And it gets back to finding fault instead of really just solving a problem. So these are all cognitive distortions, and these are 10 common ones that we all tend to do. So with the first thought, it was, I am unlikable. The question is, do you see any distortions in that thought? Go ahead and hit pause and think about it. I am unlikable. I definitely found a few distortions, and you may have found even more than I did. One of the biggest distortions in that thought is labeling. When you see something like, I am unlikable, you're putting a label on yourself. You're saying unlikable. And the question is, what does even unlikable mean? What is likable? What we're doing is we're taking a relationship between two people and we're literally turning it into a characteristic for somebody, for a human being. So, one of the methods that you might think about for something like labeling is trying to define what it means. And as you start thinking about defining something like likable, what you quickly find is being likable is less about a characteristic in an individual and more about something that maybe two people have in common, having common interests or values, or finding people that you just enjoy being around and so forth. And that's really what likability is kind of all about. So you try to be more specific, you try to define that term when you're labeling. It's also all or nothing thinking. It's making the assumption that either I'm likable or I'm unlikable, and there's nothing in between. Once again, another method that you could think about is something called thinking in shades of gray. Instead of thinking black or white, what's something that's more reasonable? And in this case, it's probably that, maybe I'm not going to be likable for everyone, but I'm also not going to be unlikable for everyone. In reality, it's somewhere in between, which frankly is what everybody is. Another one is emotional reasoning. I captured that one as well. And with emotional reasoning, it's that, the idea is I feel this way, so it must be true. And that actually kind of lends into something called mind reading, which is I'm just assuming people don't like me. I'm putting thoughts into their heads. And then the last one on here that I captured was mental filter, because I'm most likely focusing on all of the negatives, all those negative interactions, and not even thinking about any positive ones. So when you do this, that's really the next step is trying to figure out how to challenge these thoughts. And those are a couple of the methods that I'm kind of bringing out there for you. But you can find many of these methods in a book called The Feeling Good Handbook. It's a book where it'll take you through the different distortions and many methods to potentially challenge each one of those. The goal is to reframe your original thought so that you can disprove it. So you can see what we've done as we've started challenging those negative thoughts and capturing those distortions. What we're doing is we're trying to plug in some of these more positive thoughts, more of these reframed thoughts. So we're starting to realize as we challenge the word unlikable that in reality, maybe I'm unique. And the truth is, maybe in the past, I have had some friends because we have things in common, right? As we challenge some of those distortions like mental filter with things like examining the evidence, another method, we can start pulling out some evidence that actually there is proof that it's not all negative. So after we reframe, we ask ourselves this question of how much do I believe this new perspective? And if the answer is I do believe it at a high percentage, I can then go back to the original thought and say, okay, I am unlikable. How much do I believe that? And in this case, for our example, let's just say, you know what, I knocked it down to 25%. That's pretty darn good. And it might be good enough. I might decide, you know what, that's low enough that it's okay to have some of this feeling because it's who I am. I want to be liked, but in reality, it's not going to really impact my happiness sitting at 25%. If I need to challenge it more, maybe I go back and I keep digging, Or else I just leave it at 25. If I start feeling like when I go back to the top, those emotions are starting to come down, that's a really good sign. So that's kind of how we use this tool. So you're probably wondering, well, what if I don't feel any better? In reality, sometimes this might be straightforward, and you may go right at some of those negative thoughts and recognize where it's in your thinking, it's in your experience. You can see what you're bringing to those situations, and you can disprove those negative thoughts pretty quickly. Sometimes it's actually really difficult, though. You may be challenging a negative thought, but it actually may be a deep belief that you really believe in. An example would be if I have a deep rooted belief in perfectionism, that I need to be perfect. That can be something really difficult to work through. And that may be a situation where you do need to potentially sit down with someone, maybe a professional, and work through it. In other cases, you may have a situation where you just don't believe those positive thoughts that you're putting down on that paper, and that's another potential sign that you need to get a little bit of help and consider digging into it with somebody. The last thing that can happen is you have these positive thoughts, but they're really not disproving that negative thought. There may be something else that you need to explore as well. So there are some caveats to where if it's not helping, you could potentially, go get some help and, you know, practice a little bit and dig at some of those deeper beliefs once again so that you can really be effective and experience some joy and relieve yourself from some of the painful emotions. Okay, now it's your turn to give this a try. Take as many of the negative thoughts as you like and try to identify the distortions, reframe the thought, and see if you can disprove it. You can try for as many as you like. I've got three more examples here, and you can add a couple more if you like. So when you get a chance, go ahead and just press pause now, and then after you finish, press play again and go ahead and finish the program. Thank you. Here are some possible distortions and reframed thoughts. Your sheet may look completely different, and that is okay. The goal here is to give you a way to process through your thoughts and use reasoning. If you'd like, you can pause here and just take a look at some of the distortions and some of the thoughts that I added to the worksheet. Really, what you're doing is you're calling out the lies in your own head. You're calling out those twisted truths, those distortions, in order to recognize the actual truth. I think you all did a great job. Thank you for taking the time to learn how to use the daily mood log with me. I hope you have a new perspective on attacking feelings like anxiety and depression. For more resources like blogs, books, and links, please explore my website. It's www.chrisguzniczakcounseling.com.